All right. Hey, welcome to the show. My name's Chris. Today we're going to talk about normalization versus compression versus limiting. And we're going to cover this from a high level, meaning I'm going to keep it simple. And we're just going to talk in general terms about what each of these three things are and how they're different from each other. So yeah, welcome to the show. This is the Podcast Engineering Show. I'm Chris Curran. I produce podcasts and I teach at Podcast Engineering School. And I also write daily goodie blog posts. I call them the daily goodies. You can sign up on the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. The next semester of our school, which is the main thing I do in life, is teach people how to become professional podcast engineers and producers and earn a great living with a great skill that no one can ever take away from you. The next semester starts April 4th, which I know is next week, 2023. And then the next semester starts June 27th. So that's going to be a summer semester. So that's good. And yeah, so let's get into it. By the way, I have a big reference list of plugins in the show notes. Just so you know, it's a list of compressors, channel strips, upward compression plugins, vocal riders, limiters, dual stage compressors, and multiband compressors. Because I'm going to mention some of those things in today's episode, but I'm not going to be able to talk about, this is probably a list of 25 plugins or 30. So anyway, that's for reference in the show notes. And so let's talk about first normalization. Normalization is basically when you either raise or lower the entire level of a recorded file. So let's step back. Let's pretend you're going to record some audio. You set up a microphone and you record some audio into your computer, or maybe you're joining other people for a podcast episode on Squadcast or Riverside, and you're connecting online and you guys are recording an episode. Well, there's going to be a recording of your microphone, right? So when the episode's over, you're going to have a file, usually either a WAV file or an MP3 file, and that's your voice is on that file. Now, normalization is when you either raise or lower the level of the audio in that file. And when you raise the level, but when you change the level, when you adjust the level of the audio in that one file, you're adjusting the entire file from start to finish. You're either moving everything up or you're moving everything down. And that's basically what normalization is. Now, there are two types of normalization. One is called peak normalization, and that's pretty simple. You're just going to tell the computer, basically, where to put the peaks of your audio. So let's say when you recorded it, you peaked at -5. And then in post-production, let's say you're going to apply some peak normalization and you're going to tell the processor that, all right, I want it to peak at -1. So you recorded it, it peaked at -5, and now you're going to process it so it peaks at -1. So basically it's going to add 4 dB of gain to the entire file, and it's going to be 4 dB louder. And now the peak is going to be at -1. Okay, great. So, by the way, peak normalization is not very useful to us in podcast production. It's the other type of normalization that is very helpful in 2 different areas, and I'm going to tell you all about that. And we call that loudness normalization. So that's a type of normalization where we're not going to set a peak level of the audio. We're going to set an average loudness level of the entire file. So let's pretend your raw recording is at -30 LUFS. And LUFS is how we measure the loudness of an audio file. And so you record it and that raw file is -30 LUFS. But let's say you want to turn it up to to be minus 20 LUFS. Well, the processor that you use is going to raise the entire level of the entire file 10 LU, loudness units. So it's going to take it from minus 30 LUFS to minus 20 LUFS. And again, it's the same thing with normalization. It just raises the whole level of the entire file from beginning to end. But now you're doing it in terms of the average loudness of the entire file. And that's a lot more helpful to us in podcast production. There are two places where it's very helpful to do this loudness normalization. The first one is with your, like I just mentioned, when you have these raw recorded files and you're just beginning to do post-production, and let's say one of them is at minus 30, like I said, and that's pretty low volume, so you want to raise it up. Let's say you want to raise it up to minus 20. Well, you do loudness normalization, raise the level up to minus 20 LUFS, and then save that file. And then that's the file that you're going to bring into your DAW software. And so that when you're going to be working with it in your DAW, it's at a good, healthy level of minus 20. By the way, I set all my raw files to minus 23 LUFS. So that's just the standard, that's just the level I chose. You can really choose whatever level you want. I mean, in the end, if you're putting out a mono episode, the audio in mono should be minus 19 LUFS. So basically, I give myself about 4 loudness units of headroom. Some people even normalize to minus 28 LUFS. You know, this is loudness normalization again. And so we're not talking about peak normalization. In fact, we're not going to talk about peak normalization ever again because it's just not useful. So from now on, whenever I mention normalization, it's loudness normalization in terms of LUFS. So yeah, you can take your individual recordings and set them to a certain loudness level, which I choose minus 23 LUFS, and then I save it, and then those are the files that I bring into my DAW. So that's one area where you can set the loudness normalization, and it's very helpful. Because don't forget, if there's guests and other participants, I bring them all into my DAW, and they're each at minus 23 LUFS. So when I start doing editing and post-production on an episode, all the participants are already at about the same loudness level, which is helpful. Okay, so that's the first thing. Individual tracks, before you mix and edit, you can set the loudness normalization. And the other time in your production that you need to set the loudness normalization is at the very end. When you're done editing, you're done mixing, you're done with everything, and you have a file that's your final file, and you want to set that final file to the proper loudness level to send it out into the world, because the unofficial standards for podcasting are minus 19 LUFS for mono episodes or minus 16 LUFS for stereo episodes. So this is like the very last step. You set the final loudness level just before you create your final MP3 and all that stuff. And then that way, when that episode goes out into the world, it's at the preferred loudness level. It's at a good, strong, healthy level. It's not too loud, not too soft. It's good. So those are the two areas of production where you can use loudness normalization. And that's really all you need to know about normalization. Oh, except there are many applications that can do this normalization for you. In your DAW, you can do it. You can do it with a plugin like the WLM loudness meter by Waves. But you can also use Auphonic to loudness normalize your audio. You can use Auphonic multitrack. I personally use Isotope RX to set the loudness of each file that I process. Adobe Audition, you can do it there. It has a match loudness function. You can do it there. Hindenburg Journalist Pro, You can also do it there. And you can also just look at a meter as the audio is playing. You can kind of just look at a meter and see kind of where the LUFS level is. But I don't ever recommend that because that's not very scientific. That's just so you're kind of guessing. I mean, and you'll get kind of close, but it's just not. That's not professional production there. That's just we're just going to estimate it and ship it. No, we don't do that. We set the actual loudness level precisely because we're professionals, right? So yeah, those are some apps where you can do the loudness normalization, and there are others. There are other plugins. So, and we're not going to obviously go into all that now. So yeah, so that's normalization. Now, compression and limiting are different. So first of all, what I want to say about compression and limiting is that they are very close cousins, compression and limiting. In fact, the only difference between compression and limiting is the ratio of compression. Compression, you can use different ratios, 2-to-1, 3-to-1, 8-to-1, 20-to-1, and the ratio determines how aggressive the compressor is going to be or how gentle it's going to be. With a limiter, the ratio is always infinity to 1. It's it's I wouldn't even call it aggressive. People call limiters a brick wall limiter, right? That's sort of like a slang term for a limiter because you can picture, should be called a brick ceiling actually. Because picture you're in a room with a brick ceiling and you want to raise your hand up. Well, your hand can only go up to the brick. It can't go any higher because the ceiling just caps it right there. That's what a limiter does to audio. It sets a ceiling level or a cap level, and the audio can never go above that. So that's limiting. It's very handy in many cases. And we'll talk a little bit about limiting later, but let's talk about compression because compression is let's put it this way. Compression along with EQ are the two processes that professional audio engineers and producers utilize almost on every piece of audio. Compression and EQ are like the two go-to tools for audio production for many reasons. Okay, but let's talk about compression. Now, compression is different than normalization. Remember when I was explaining normalization, I said that if you can raise or lower the level, but it raises the level of the entire file, right? From the very start of the file to the very end, all of it gets either raised or lowered to a certain loudness level. Well, compression doesn't do that. Compression doesn't necessarily affect the entire file. In fact, mostly what it affects are the parts in the audio where the level gets loud. So compression, what you're actually doing in a technical sense is you're compressing the dynamic range of audio. And the way it does it is when audio gets louder, the compressor will sort of push it down a little bit. So compression pushes down the loud parts. But the medium level parts and the quiet parts, the compressor doesn't do anything. It just doesn't do anything, literally. So compression is how you tame those loud peaks. And why use compression? Well, it's to provide a good listening experience to all the listeners. You've probably heard of when people have to ride the volume knob of a podcast, right? Because sometimes it gets really quiet, so they turn up the volume of their playback system. And then other times it gets really loud and they have to quick reach for the volume and turn down the level of their playback system. That's called riding the volume knob, and that's about the worst thing you can do to a listener, is force them to ride a volume knob. That's terrible. In fact, listeners are not going to do that for very long. They'll do it for about 30 seconds, and then they're just going to turn off the podcast because it's too difficult to listen to it. Either they can't hear what's being said because it's too quiet, or they're getting their ears blown out because it's way too loud. So compression is the process by which you control that dynamic range. So the quiet parts are not too quiet. They're a little quieter, but not extremely quiet. And then the loud parts, they're not going to blow out your eardrums, but they're going to be a little louder, but not blow out your eardrums. So that's what compression does, and that's why we do it, and that's the benefit to the end listener. And again, it only affects, the compressor only changes the audio or affects the audio when the level gets loud above the threshold, which is one of the controls of a compressor, the threshold. So you can set that threshold wherever you want. And I just have a couple little things, little reminders and fundamentals about compression. And these are pre-compression reminders. So before you use compression, here's what you need to know. You have to be sure that you record audio with as little background noise as possible, because compression will raise the noise floor. Okay, that it just does. It just, because it compresses the dynamic range and it brings up the quiet parts, it also brings up the noise floor. So you just have to be aware of that. So the way you handle that is to record in a very quiet place, right? And then you don't have to worry about it. Using no compression at all is usually not a great experience for the listener. Now, in the cases where someone is speaking and they have very good microphone technique, and they don't ever get too quiet, and maybe when they get a little loud, they back off the microphone a little. If someone sort of regulates their volume by themselves, then you could probably get away with no compression. But for literally everyone else in the world, using at least a little bit of compression is always good and helpful. Sometimes you have to use a lot, though, because some participants, they get really loud and scream, and then they literally get very quiet and whisper. Some people do that, and you have to be able to use a lot of compression, and we'll talk about a couple of the tools. And also just be aware that compression and limiting and normalization, all these three work on both individual tracks as well as the overall mix. So keep that in mind. So there are compressor controls. We're not really going to get into that because that's a little too deep for this episode. Also, there's a bunch of different types of compression: multiband compression, dual stage compression, side chaining, mid-side mode, also parallel compression, which parallel compression is the easiest and most useful one. It's basically blending in the dry signal with the compressed signal. That's very handy. Now, the effect of compression is, again, that the loud parts might be a little louder, but they're not going to blow your eardrums out of your skull. And the quiet parts, yeah, they're going to be a little quieter, but they're not going to be so quiet that you can't even hear it, right? So that's what compression does. And I want to play a before and after clip. So I'm going to play you, it's the same clip. The first, the before, if you will, is raw and uncompressed. It's just a raw recording where it's my voice, and I kind of talked at a normal volume, then I kind of got really loud, and then I talked at a normal volume again, and then I got really quiet. And you'll hear this when I play the raw one. You're not going to be able to hear when I talk at a low volume. It's so low and quiet. And when I get loud, I'm going to adjust it for this episode so it doesn't blow your ears out, but you'll see the difference. The dynamic range is massive, and it's terrible. You'll hear it. So that's the before processing. And then I have the same file, and I processed it. I compressed it using several different compressors. And so that's the after, right? That's after compression. So we have the before compression and after compression file, and I want to play them back to back for you right now, okay? So you don't have to adjust the volume or anything. I'm going to handle that for you. But here is the before compression file. This is the raw recording without any compression. Check it out. But then I come back to talking normal volume, and so this is the normal volume. And then, whoa, that's, people get loud. Now I'm back to normal volume. And that's how it works. And then, at the end of a sentence, I might just, sort of trail off a little bit and not really say something loud. But now I'm back to normal volume. Right over here, normal distance, normal volume from the mic. And oh, yeah, that was funny. That was a joke. But now I'm back to normal volume. And, of course, at the end of sentences, sometimes people just, they trail off and they sort of mumble and they don't say it very loud. But then they come back to normal volume, and then you just have a normal conversation. And that's a lot of times how it goes. Okay, so you can hear the wild difference in volume there, right? In fact, even my normal level of talking is a little bit low because I had to bring down the whole level because my peaks were so loud, right? It was really crazy. But the parts where I was like talking under my breath, you can't even hear that. Okay, so that's the before. Let's listen to the after, where I applied a couple, 2 or 3 different compressor plugins. Okay, let's listen to the after and see how much better this is for you to listen to. Here we go. But then I come back to talking normal volume. And so this is the normal volume. And then, whoa, that's, people get loud. Now I'm back to normal volume. And that's how it works. And then, at the end of a sentence, I might just, sort of trail off a little bit and not really say something loud. But now I'm back to normal volume. Right over here, normal distance, normal volume from the mic. And oh, yeah, that was funny. That was a joke. But now I'm back to normal volume. And, of course, at the end of sentences, sometimes people just, they trail off and they sort of mumble and they don't say it very loud. But then they come back to normal volume, and then you just have a normal conversation. And that's a lot of times how it goes. All right, well, there you go. It's abundantly obvious that the second file I played is way better. You can hear it. Almost the whole thing is nice and loud and clear. Now, when I started talking under my breath, yes, that was at a considerably lower volume, but you could still understand it. And when I got loud, it was a little bit louder, but it wasn't extreme. So there you go. There's your A/B comparison of an uncompressed file and then a compressed file, and that's the difference that compression can make. So as I said in the show notes, I'll list a bunch of different compressors. So on that compressed file that I just played for you, I used a regular compressor, but I also used a plugin called Max Volume from Waves, which does upward compression. And that, very simply, takes the lower volume sections, the part where I was talking under my breath, and it raises them up. And it leaves the rest alone, but the lower volume stuff, it'll raise it up. That's Max Volume is a really handy plugin for podcast production. And another plugin I used was Vocal Rider, which also automatically rides the level of a person's voice. If they get loud, the fader will actually pull the level down a bit. And if someone starts whispering or mumbling, the fader will push up the level a little bit. And I also use probably 1 or 2 standard compressors. Of course, the Schoeps Omnichannel is just a great plugin with a great compressor. That's probably what I used on that file. It's been a while since I did that. Yeah, and then limiters. Again, I don't even think I had to use a limiter, but I might have. The Schoeps Omnichannel has a limiter within it. And by the way, that Schoeps Omnichannel is from Waves, and it's a very inexpensive plugin. It's a great plugin. In fact, if you're going to buy one plugin for EQ and compression and de-essing and limiting and saturation and gating, it has all those things. It's really good. And for limiters, I also love the Pro L2 from FabFilter. It's a great limiter. So usually a limiter you can put at the end of your plugin chain, and just so it catches any peaks. And usually I set the limiter at -1, just so it doesn't, come that close to 0. All right, well, that is it. So we talked about normalization, compression, and a little bit about limiting. And now you know the difference. I guess to recap regarding normalization, Peak normalization, you don't really ever have to worry about that. You don't need to use that usually. Use loudness normalization. That's the one that's very handy in those two places. There's two areas of production I mentioned earlier. And then you have compression. There's different types. There's regular compressors. There's upward compression, multiband compression. We didn't get into all those details because I want to keep this very simple. Yeah. And then, of course, limiters. We talked a little bit about that, the brick wall concept. So that's it. That's this episode. I hope this was helpful. Again, in the show notes, I'll list all those. I have a bunch of compressors, channel strips, a bunch of good plugins that do a lot of this stuff that I was talking about. And don't forget, next semester of PES, June 27th, 2023. So I appreciate you. I thank you for listening. For those of you like Michael 320 who thought that I wasn't doing my show anymore because I haven't put out an episode for 6 weeks. I'm sorry I missed 6 weeks, but there's a lot going on. I'm actually launching a new show within about a month or two. I'm in the planning stages. It's very exciting. I'm not going to give any details yet, but it's totally based on podcast production, and it's great. I'm so excited about it. I'm thrilled about the new show I'm going to start. I can't wait to tell you all about it at the right time. Of course, if you ever need help with anything, contact me through the website, podcastengineeringschool.com. There's a contact page. Just send me a note. Either just say hello or ask a question. I'm here. I'm human. If you pinch me, I'll scream. Maybe. Also, don't forget the smaller course I have, Getting New Clients at Higher Rates. Yeah, if you're a podcast editor or producer and you work with clients, well, maybe you can get some new clients at higher rates. And it's a really cool on-demand course. It's a shorter course than the big Podcast Engineering School course. But if you want to email me for a special discount, I'll give you a special discount on the small course, Getting New Clients at Higher Rates. But you have to email me or contact me however you want to, really. Doesn't matter. All right, that's it. I'll stop rambling. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one. Bye.